Hello and welcome to another episode of The Holistic Way. My name is Todd Hart and I'm the host of the show. Today we have Kathleen DiChiara with us, who has launched a community movement, roadtohealth.com, to get people thinking about the connection between what we eat, how we feel, and the overall quality of our lives. She believes real healthcare reform begins in our own kitchen. All of her projects include the principles of functional nutrition, which looks at the whole body rather than individual parts. So welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I'll also say, I'm going to predict that within a year, you're going to have a book on the New York Times bestseller list.
All right.
You'll be on Oprah in some form.
Okay.
And your
Sunday,
name will be known nationally. So welcome to the show.
Appreciate it.
So tell us your background and how you got into what you're doing now.
Yeah, so I fell into the field of nutrition out of desperation, actually sheer desperation. My own physical body had started to fail, and I was in the medical system because I had some acute issues. I had sudden onset neuropathy and some issues with my back. And initially those were addressed, but that opened up a whole array of chronic disease, so autoimmune disease and chronic symptoms. And that's where I started to get poor results from our modern medical system. So they didn't really have the tools to help me unravel some of those issues. So each time I went back to the doctor with new symptoms, I got a new diagnosis and maybe some more medication and maybe some suggestions for additional surgeries. And so I had a really deep intuition that there was something that I could or should be doing. And I would bring these kinds of concerns up and ask lots of questions. And it was often discouraged. You know, I was discouraged from thinking about it in that way and told, you know, that it was something that I needed to learn to manage.
These are the doctors discouraging you.
Right,
okay.
Exactly. And, you know, and so it continued to doubt myself, even though my intuition was really strong. And at the same time, around the time of my original physical breakdown, or my diseased state, I would say, my oldest son, was diagnosed with PDD, which is pervasive developmental disorder, and that's an autism spectrum disorder. So, you know, I suppose that was an additional motivation to really push the envelope a little bit, to get curious about what was this food as medicine approach. And we had tried a few things with him and weren't necessarily largely successful. So I wasn't sure what to expect, but I was out of options, you know, so I thought, I have nothing to lose and everything to gain, and so I'm going to take a deep dive into what the possibilities are, and that's exactly what I did. I just started studying and reading. So for 7 years now, I've been researching and studying all aspects of the physiological parts of the body and the connection to food. So that's how I got into it.
So what is functional nutrition? How is it different from conventional approach to nutrition?
Yeah, so the easiest way for me to describe that would be to say that it is not disease-oriented. We don't really look at the body we don't break it apart. So if somebody has a migraine, we don't think it's a dysfunction of the brain, right? We look at the whole body and the whole system of the body. And I think that's really what differentiates it from both modern nutrition or even modern medicine, in that we look at the whole body and what systems might not be working efficiently, and then we take away the blocking factors is what we do, that prohibit the body from healing itself. So there's sort of an old saying in the holistic community, or it was an integrative practitioner that I heard this from some time ago, and it really resonated with me, which was that the physician keeps the patient busy while the body heals itself. And so I always found that to be true, that really even a good practitioner isn't healing anybody, they're just serving as a guide. So when people, I think it's less about what we add in and more about what we take away. So if people take things out of their diet or their life that's interfering with their body's ability to heal, I think they see greater results. And this is true with people who try to manage symptoms using over-the-counter medications or prescriptions. You know, with essential oils, that those are sometimes a better alternative to dealing with symptoms because they don't really interfere with the physiological aspects of the body. So it's just an interesting approach to look at all aspects of the body together.
So what are some of the things that you would take away and then reintroduce later? What are some of those things?
Well, so one of the big culprits, of course, since we're talking about nutrition, and certainly the list is long, but we could start there. So nutrition, it's the one thing that we constantly put inside the body, right? So it's the thing we do most often, right? Multiple times a day, 4 or 5, maybe 6 times a day, we're bringing food and liquid into the body. And so if we're bringing something into the body that's then triggering an immune response, we're agitating the body and we're keeping our immune system firing all the time, which is leading to internal inflammation and oftentimes leading to disease. So if people pull foods out of the diet, even temporarily, to calm down that process and stop the immune system from reacting, it gives the body a chance to heal because we're constantly regenerating. Our gut is regenerating, our intestines are regenerating, and then people can later reintroduce those things and see whether or not their body is still having a reaction to it. So that's an easy example of something that you could potentially take away.
So is the list the same for everyone of what you take away? Or is it, do you interview people and maybe get a feel for it? Or?
I always tell people to start with the big bullies, which is the top 7 allergens, you know, dairy, gluten, soy, corn, eggs are usually the biggest culprits. And that's generally because of the proteins in them. So people are really reacting to the proteins because they often have what's called leaky gut or permeable gut. So they've damaged the intestinal lining, they bring these foods in, and then those proteins bypass the lining of the small intestines and hit the lymphatic tissue behind the gut, which then triggers an immune response. And sometimes that's delayed. It can be up to 3 days later. They've brought a food in and they can have a delayed IgG-mediated reaction several days later. So it can be difficult to assess, well, what is it that I'm reacting to? Because if somebody's feeling joint pain or migraines or constipation or any type of symptom on a Monday, they're not necessarily going to think back to what they had on Saturday or Saturday night, so it can get confusing. So if you pull some of the big offenders out and then give the body a chance to rest and then reintroduce one at a time, that's usually great.
Now, is it because food is becoming more processed that this is becoming a bigger problem?
Yes and no. So yes, because the food is processed, that in and of itself is irritating to the gut, right? So a lot of processed food is genetically modified, and that's irritating to the gut. We know that causes damage. But also antibiotic use, birth control pills, chronic stress, poor sleep. There's lots of things that contribute to why the gut is in the condition that it's in. And so then the foods, you react to foods, but that's really a secondary issue to an issue that already exists, if that makes sense. So the food's sometimes not the first culprit, it's just that the body is then responding to food as a result of having what we call dysbiosis or leaky gut or some type of malfunction in the gut. And you know, we'll talk more about gut-related issues, but that essentially, the body is then responding to the food.
So is the body already exhausted, and then when you introduce the food, it now has to battle that food as well? Is that what?
Well, we're not intended to have gut damage. So if you already have a leaky gut, right, and you have some damage to the intestinal lining, what our food is not supposed to do is to bypass our intestine. So we have an opening from the mouth to the anus, and it's never supposed to hit the vital organs or into the bloodstream. Right, so it gets into, it goes through the stomach and then into the intestines where it's broken down, and all of your bacteria there convert it and use all the essential nutrients and get everything where it's supposed to go. So if it's bypassing the small intestine and getting and hitting the immune system, then the immune system is really reacting to the food. So you have to look at it from different. I guess I would invite people to not think about the food as the problem as much as the immune system.
Okay.
So once the immune system's been triggered, you can react to any food, not just the top 7 allergens, but any food at all. So some people can react to cucumbers or citrus or anything that their body brings in.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is the single most important thing people can do to improve their health? Is it one thing? Is
Heal
it
the gut
a few
is
things?
number one for that exact reason that we just talked about. people are starting to hear about leaky gut, and they're starting to hear about dysbiosis or bacteria, because science is really starting to take a deep dive into this area. It's an exciting time for researchers because we're just beginning to understand the microbiota, that inner ecosystem. And we have 10 times more bacteria than we have any other cells. So really we are bacteria. I mean, that's what's keeping us alive. That's our natural defense system. But I don't think people have really a deep appreciation for how powerful that is. And in fact, in any type of condition, we always start with the gut. I don't know of anybody who can have health that doesn't have gut damage or poor gut health. And you don't have to have gut-related symptoms. So people will often say, well, I'm not bloated, or I don't have any stomach aches or stomach pain or anything like that. But the reality is many of the symptoms related to gut damage are unrelated to the gut. So they're happening in other places. Migraines are a big example of that. Arthritis, constipation, fibromyalgia, the list goes on and on, even autism. So that was our experience with our son. So we did a gut healing protocol, which was what essentially had the most impact for us.
And how is he today?
Great, straight A student, undetectable, yeah.
Wow. And what were the key contributors that you found were affecting him, or
everything?
That you took away?
It's a whole body approach. So you can never, people always ask, what is it? What was the most important thing? What could
we want
you
a
do?
magic bullet. We want a magic
right,
bullet. Yeah.
Right. And I think that again, every person is different, and every where you would begin would be different. But I would say that without a doubt, the most changes were noticed when we removed the foods that were creating inflammation in the gut, which then translated to inflammation in the brain, but also healing the gut. So I think many people understand, oh, I'm reacting to a food, they pull the food out. What they never really investigate is, what do I do next? How do I heal the gut? How do I close up those junctions so that when I reintroduce food, or should I have an accidental exposure, how do I stop that immune response from happening? And I think that was what we were missing for him in the early years, that we really went much further in. So that was where we saw the most results. How do you heal the gut? So one is you take the offending foods out, a lot of the foods that are creating inflammation. And then there are a lot of traditional foods like bone broth that are used because they can help to soothe the gut and bring all the minerals and nutrients back in. L-glutamine is an amino acid that's used to repair the gut, so that's been a very effective approach. And so it's sort of, it's more comprehensive, and again, it would depend on the individual, but those are some of the first examples that we can think of. And then probiotic therapy is really powerful. And I mean probiotic therapy, like I'm not talking about eating a cup of yogurt. I mean, we're talking about some really high amounts of therapeutic dose probiotics. And they're different strains for different things. And understanding which one works best for you. There is no one size fits all when it comes to probiotics, and you also want to switch your strain. And then the other key for us and for many people is digestive enzymes. Many people are not properly breaking down food because they lack the digestive enzymes needed to do so, or that they lack it for now. So people can use digestive enzymes as a tool while they are healing. So if you're not assimilating your food or breaking it down or properly digesting it, that also means that those nutrients are not getting where they're supposed to. So you can have other symptoms like anxiety if you're deficient in B vitamins or magnesium. These are all lead to other symptoms, and so you think you have another condition, but it's all directly related to the same problem.
Now, doesn't cooking food kill the natural enzymes that are in the food? So when you eat it, it's missing those enzymes, so it would be important to replace them?
Well, interestingly, that's a good thing and something that maybe people are thinking about. But when people have digestive distress or any type of leaky gut, they don't have the digestive power to break down raw foods.
Oh, even raw foods?
Yes.
Whoa.
So cooked food, so one of the diets that became popularized by Natasha Campbell was the GAPS diet, which is gut and psychology syndrome. And that's a all-cooked food. Everything needs to be pre-cooked and steamed, and long and slow cooking, so crock pot cooking and soups and stews. And the intention there is that you're pre-digesting the food. The food is digested already, or that process has begun during the cooking process, so that when the body brings it in, it's able to assimilate the food. If you bring in raw food and you don't have good digestion, or you have leaky gut and you don't have enough enzymes, the enzymes that are naturally occurring in the raw food are not sufficient enough and can be very irritating. Even irritating to people with IBS or other
That's the complete
issues.
opposite of what I was thinking would be the case.
And so people could eventually move to a raw food diet, and that's where we get into what is the diet that's right for me today, right? So we don't want to use these big blanket approaches to, oh, I should be eating this particular diet, or this is a healthy diet. The reality is your diet should evolve based on what it is that you're dealing with. And so we always want to be assessing what is my goal right now. And if my goal is to heal the gut and reverse autoimmune disease, or attempt to reverse some of these chronic symptoms I might have, then what are the things that I need to do that are going to help my body in its current state today? And so you can still be working towards a primarily plant-based or raw food-based diet, but if your body doesn't have the tools and it's struggling and you think that's what you're supposed to be eating, then you're just setting yourself up for more problems.
So does it add a lot of time to your day to create certain meals? It does.
That's
an honest answer.
Yes, a lot. I mean, there is no shortcut for cooking and prepping food. And I think what's happened is that we've just created a new normal in our society, that people are so accustomed now to being out and grabbing their food on the go, that we forget that the body's been built by this notion that, food takes time and preparation, and even seeds like nuts and grains, those things should be soaked and often sprouted to make them more bioavailable to the body. People are not going to soak nuts or almonds on Monday because they want granola Thursday, but that's really what you need to do. So you're thinking ahead and always having these things available. And it gets simpler once you get into the routine of doing it, but yes, it is a commitment. But I think health is a huge commitment, and we should make that commitment to ourselves. It's not an area where I think I can skip.
I wanted to know what common health issues could be addressed using this functional approach. You kind of mentioned some of them, but what are some of the things that people would look for, would have, that they should start thinking this way about looking into this?
Yeah, so there are many. One of the big common ones I think that I haven't already talked about would be yeast. A lot of people end up with yeast overgrowth, and they miss some of the early warning signs. Maybe women are getting yeast infections, or maybe they have athlete's foot or toe fungus, or itchy skin, or things like that, or even joint pain and headaches, and they don't make the connection that it's gut related, and so maybe they take some prednisone or Advil, or they do other things, and that makes the situation worse. So we all have yeast in our body, but when the yeast overgrow the good guys, so they become dominant, and they start to thrive because it's an opportunistic bacteria, so it will continue to thrive. Then it becomes difficult for the body to adapt, and then we end up with lots of other symptoms: mood swings, sensitivity to perfumes, even a giddiness or an inappropriate laughter. I don't know if you've been around somebody that they're almost drunk from the reaction to the yeast. Joint pain is a big one, mood swings, PMS, congestion. So again, people tend to go to, how do I treat this, right? What do I take for it? And then they're taking individual over-the-counter or prescription medications for a condition that's originating in the gut that they're not making the relationship to. And the longer that goes on, the bigger the problem it becomes. It becomes a little bit more challenging to reverse it. So that's an example of identifying it early on and recognizing, again, that healing the gut, can resolve some of these issues. So when you start there, you can see what kinds of symptoms will dissolve on their own and really start to peel back the layers of the onion. You can also use other natural approaches for symptom relief, because we know that people are suffering. We know that they have to get up and go to work, they have to take care of their kids. So while healing the gut can be an investment you're making over time, right? It's not going to happen overnight. You can rely on some of these other things temporarily, maybe it's acupuncture or chiropractic care, or even using the essential oils to help manage some of get the symptom relief you need so you can be productive, but you'll be working ultimately towards to the bigger goal. And even oil of oregano, I mean, that's one of the most powerful things we have against the yeast in terms of treating it. So we would use that essential oil internally, sometimes putting it in a capsule because it can be quite strong. The taste is quite intense.
So is this something that you would attack one time and remove things and go in and cleanse the gut? How are you attacking this? How are you stopping this yeast infection?
So the sooner you get to it, the more likely you are that you can go in and rebalance that. We can also use a probiotic called which has a particular strain in it. It's called S. boulardii, and that is a yeast strain that eats yeast. So it's a specific probiotic, or it's a strain within other probiotics that is specific to somebody who has yeast. So that can be a helpful way to keep it in check and manage it, but also to treat it initially. But even if you catch it early, the oil of oregano can really kill off some of that yeast, and it doesn't kill the good bacteria. So with antibiotics or other types of approaches, they kill everything. So they're not, they don't distinguish between good and bad. It's just a wipeout. So
you're actually left vulnerable in that case, aren't you?
Exactly. Well, then that's right. So not only are you treating symptoms and trying to get relief, but then you're setting yourself for even a bigger problem, which is what ends up happening. And people will go back and say, well, geez, I've had this for 10 years or 20 years, or I've always had this symptom. And so they can actually trace it back to when it originally started.
Now, you have an educational website. Is that roadtohealth.com?
Right, and I'll be adding more to that, but essentially that's a platform where people can go to start to explore things that they might be feeling themselves, and ways in which they can learn on their own. It's free resources, and as we put more and more information up there, that's available to people, and recipes and things to get people started. But
and Road is like Rhode Island, R-H-O-D-E.
Exactly.
So
That's right.
road2tohealth.com is a good
right.
informational website, educational website that people can go and learn and get more information about this.
Exactly.
What do you think is the biggest mistake people make when it comes to choosing a diet?
Oh, that's a good one. So with diet, people tend to choose diet based on somebody else's success with it, right? So their hairdresser is losing weight and she feels great, and she tells them about this particular diet she's on, and they're hooked. They love it, right? They're going to try it, they're convinced. Or it's on a particular way of thinking, or maybe a specific belief they have, or they've tied to a particular diet. And interestingly, the word diet, the Greek meaning is way of life or manner of living, right? So it's always more comprehensive than food alone, right? So it's sort of, it can be all the things that we take in. But if you're suffering and you're managing disease and you don't feel well, then we could argue that your diet isn't working for you. It's not the right manner of living or way of life. And people are very resistant to diet change. They just are really stuck on a particular way. That's how they identify themselves. I've never seen more people describe themselves by the actual diet that they eat, calling themselves a diet, essentially. I'm this, I'm that. And never really asking the question of, do I feel amazing eating this way? Does my body feel vibrant and alive, or am I struggling with my own body? And then the other confusion with diet is that people will choose a diet that might be used to heal from a particular condition, but not necessarily to prevent it. So a good example of that would be an autoimmune condition. So once somebody has triggered an autoimmune response in the body, they can often be given a protocol that requires them to remove dairy or eggs or all three, nightshades. And that's a solution for them because they have an autoimmune, but a perfectly healthy person wouldn't prevent that disease by not including those foods in their diet. So you wouldn't remove those foods as a way to prevent the disease,
right? Even
though you may need to remove them as an approach to healing it, so that can be confusing. And then I can't help but mention gluten-free living, because that is just going through the roof, and it's become so popular. I'm gluten-free and have been for a very long time, and my entire family is gluten-free. So I've studied gluten for 3 years, and on every aspect of it. So I have a deep appreciation for what it is and what it does. And
I'm smiling because we know each other. We're in some similar social circles, and we hang out once in a while. And every time I'm with you, I'm always like pretending like I'm holding my bread, like I'm not giving up my bread. Leave my bread alone.
It's true.
And that's what I'm thinking now. That's why I'm smiling.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
It's true. Yeah. And actually, my children asked if at age 16 they could have a big bucket of gluten. So you're not alone in protecting. They are Italian. So I think what's interesting about gluten-free living is people will choose a gluten-free diet without any understanding of why they're doing it in the first place, right? So maybe they feel they can lose weight, or they see it's become popularized, or they just see gluten-free and think automatically that's healthy. And so to help people to better understand gluten-free foods, you don't want to have a processed food diet that then becomes a gluten-free processed food diet, because essentially it's still a processed food diet.
Okay.
And that's what's happening the majority of the time. So they're having gluten-free waffles and gluten-free muffins in the morning, and then they have their gluten-free croutons on their salad with their gluten-free wrap, and they have their gluten-free pasta at dinner and a gluten-free pizza, and their gluten-free cookies with their gluten-free ice cream, right? So
But it's all processed food.
Exactly.
Because I see the whole aisle at, I believe,
Yes.
Stop and Shop or something, but it's an entire aisle now of gluten-free
Oh,
products.
no, it's getting bigger.
It's
the
huge.
industry's huge. And it's the amount of revenue being brought into the gluten-free processed food arena is astronomical. So
But it's still processed food.
it's still processed food. So really what you're ideally doing is moving from a gluten-free diet, when you're moving on to a gluten-free diet, is a whole food-based diet. So the one way to check in with yourself is to say, am I spending a lot of time reading labels? And if you're reading a lot of labels, then you're not eating the proper gluten-free diet, because gluten-free foods are generally, they have no labels.
Right.
They're whole food-based.
I just want to make a quick point. If you have any questions for Kathleen, you can send an email to our show. The email address is on the screen, theholisticway@hotmail.com, theholisticway@hotmail.com, and I'll forward it to her, and you'll respond to any questions that people may have.
Right.
We have a minute left. Any
Okay.
final thoughts that you'd want to leave people with, maybe plant a seed in people's minds?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we could all just lose this idea that we have an external list of good and bad foods. So it's important to recognize that the immune system of the body can react to any food at any time in your life. And foods don't necessarily fall into two categories of good and bad, but they do fall into the category of bad for you. And so if your body is reacting to a particular food, then that becomes a food that you wouldn't want to include.
So it's constantly evolving.
Constantly. Exactly. So the diet you ate in your 20s isn't necessarily the diet that you're going to eat in your 40s, and particularly for women once they've had children and their hormones have changed. If we get caught up in the, well, that's the diet that used to work for me, then we struggle with it because we're 2 and 3 decades later and it's no longer working.
Kathleen, thank you for coming on the show.
Okay, you're welcome.
It is always a pleasure to hang out with you and
All
chat.
right, thanks for having me.
Thank you for watching the show today. I'm Todd Hart. This has been The Holistic Way. Have a great day.